Hey guys, here question of the day. Tougher one than normal because this one can be long. I could go on for a while. What was your dad like when you were a child? Um, I think if I had to describe my father, Greg Lewis, I would say the number one thing that he is selfless. So, I mean, there was a time, probably I don't even know if Josh remembers this, but for sure not Katie and Kit, that dad would go and play basketball and softball, right, for the church. Right? It wasn't like it was a beer drinking league and he would go out and, you know, pop back, 6 or 10 beers and come home drunk or anything. Dad's not a drinker. But I think there was a time where he did that. And I can remember a few times where mom would get upset that he was off playing, because I would go with him to all the time, right? It wasn't like, again, it was a church thing. So, you know, Steve Sutton and all these other people that had kids, their kids were there too, right? So it wasn't that it was just, dad and he brought along his one kid. It was that other kids just came and showed up and played. So they would sometimes play fast pitch, slow pitch, basketball, you name it. So he would go to that and sometimes he get in trouble. But that is like the only thing I can think of that my dad ever did for himself. I don't think he's ever gone on a guy trip. I don't think he's gone on a golf trip that didn't include me. Um, I don't, yeah, I just don't know about that. So I would think he is selfless. Now, stories growing up as a child about him, I mean, that's the theme of it, but it's always, dad would go to work early, dad would get home later, 6:30, I would think, 5:30 to 6:30, somewhere in there, and probably be tired, right? And now, I'm not saying dad didn't love his lazy boy and didn't love taking naps and doing that kind of stuff, but he also played catch a lot. I mean, Josh and I, he'd mostly be like, you and Josh go play catch, right? But eventually we drag him out and we drag him out to shoot baskets and do that kind of stuff. Now, every time you got him out to shoot baskets, he mostly would kind of meander his way over to the garden and start weeding the garden and taking care of it and doing all that stuff. But um, he threw a lot of 500 where Josh and I would, try to see who could catch the ball. The one he did. I took some notes over here. That's why I'm looking over here. Now, I did have a note here that, when you play catch, you always be like, Dad, get down and catcher and pitch. Let me pitch to you. Let me practice pitching. Yeah, he didn't really like doing that. As I think back as I got older, right? You're like, man, my knees hurt. I can't go down there and sit down there and catch you. Not to mention, I mean, we're throwing the ball in the dirt and over his head. And yeah, that was, I don't know how he did that at all. Um, did love to shoot baskets. He was a good basketball player and loved playing. So that was always fun. What else did I have here? Um, oh, I wanted to say that keep in mind, Dad might have done all the stuff outside with the garden and the lawn, but keep in mind, Mom is still making like the house run, right? It was a very old school relationship where, well, kind of old school because Mom still was teaching, but she'd come home and do dishes and cleaning and cooking and you know laundry and all that kind of stuff. Dad would come home and we'd drag him out and make him play with us sometimes, and but then he would you know be in charge of the yard and the garden, right? The cars, stuff like that. So they both kind of made it work, right? What else would I have to say? I put down some stories here that I thought, oh, there was a funny story where I thought Dad was so cool. Was Bill Bobinet, our neighbor, he came over. I don't know, they owned the horse. I don't know where they kept it or what they did, but that would be something that Bill would do for Nicole or something. But anyway, Bill brought a horse out, and behind our houses where we grew up in Heatherwood, there wasn't anything behind them, right? Now there's all houses and it's all been built up, but at the time it was just an open field. So Bill bought one and we were kind of riding it, brought one to the house, And we were kind of riding it back and forth and doing everything and just walking. And half the time, no, most of the time, Bill was just walking with it, and guiding it. And us kids would just be on there. And it was fun, right? We were, I was probably fourth or fifth grade. It was super fun. And then Bill's like, hey, Greg, you want to get on? I'm like, yeah, I'll get on. And Dad just hopped right on there and just like took off. And I was like, my dad's a freaking cowboy. Like, what in the world is that? Like, going as fast as that horse could go. And even Bill was like, man, I don't think I've seen that horse run like that. And he's like, yeah, we didn't have a whole lot of horses growing up. We had some. And so I learned to ride. And I was like, man, that was awesome. So it's just one of those things when you're little, you see your dad and you're like, oh man, dad's awesome. He's awesome basketball player, and he throws the best pop-ups when I want me to practice on those. Now you're gonna ride a horse. And then I'll always remember Dad used to shoot starlings in the backyard with his pellet gun, like from his window, so nobody could see him doing it, because we're in the city, you can't be out there shooting. But he just hated those things, and they'd get up in our attic and everything. So man, he'd see him out there and just be like, bing, bing, just pick them off. And one time I remember, I'd go up in his room and I was watching him shoot them, because he wouldn't let me shoot it, because he's like, no, you'll miss, and then they'll be gone forever. I want to kill them. And one time he hit this one, and we went out there and it's still like flailing around. And I was like, oh man, that sucks. This thing's just gonna sit here and just like wait to die. And then all of a sudden, Dad just freaking, he had his boots on and just stepped on its head and crushed its whole body. And you're like, oh my gosh, Dad's crazy. He just killed that freaking bird like it was nothing. But then you forget, you remember, like, oh yeah, Dad loves to hunt and fish, and that's how they grew up, and that's how it wasn't that big a deal. That was the first time that I kind of was like, oh, yep, he's still kind of like his dad. He's still kind of like Grandpa Lewis. Grandpa Lewis was a tough old guy, right? And he was a gruff dude, but I could imagine, yeah. I mean, well, because Grandpa Lewis, talking about gruff, get off the subject of Dad for a second, he would sit out and shoot dogs. He would just like get his BB gun and like pump it one time and just be like, boop, and that dog would be like, and just scurry off. And because he just didn't like dogs being around, didn't want them, it just didn't want them around at all. So that was the first time I was like, oh man, he's kind of like Grandpa. So that was pretty funny. There's just a lot of stories I can remember of Dad just being generous. We went out to Uncle Keith's a lot. And I don't know about a lot. I mean, I was tiny. I was, 7 years old. But we would go out there and help him build or fix his fence or whatever it was. They lived on some farmland, and, digging post holes and putting new posts in and doing all that stuff. And yeah, I just always tagged along. I don't think I had a choice. It was just kind of like, hey, Mom was probably like, I'll take care of Josh, but you take Benji with you. And so I would go and riding in the back of my Uncle Keith's, blue truck. And when I say riding in the back, I mean riding in the bed, right? And just down these country roads, and nobody thought anything about it. I just sat back there and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So just a lot of that kind of stuff. I remember going, as I got older and I was old enough to go running with Dad. Dad would go running with his friends like Steve Sutton and John Cornick and Mark Rains. They would kind of run. And for a while they were running home from church on Sunday nights. So I thought that was the coolest, that I could change of clothes, get into shorts, a t-shirt, and running shoes and run with those guys. And it was nice because at that time, I was playing basketball. So you're in great shape, and you're 15 or 16 years old. So you're like, oh yeah, you guys run really slow. And so we'd get to Duncan Road and I'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to finish this faster. And so you'd take off. And I just remember thinking that was cool to be included in that. And so again, it was never Dad like, no, get out of here. He was always like, sure, yeah, you want to do this? Sure, but you got to keep up. But he never was like, don't include my kids because I need my own time. He just was never that way, so he always did what he was supposed to do, and he was always the nice guy, and everybody loved him for that, right? I mean, he, went to work tirelessly for a few companies. He just didn't work very many different jobs, right? It kind of stayed until the position wasn't available. And then got a job at the end with PBI Gordon, later in life. I don't even know when that would have been. Probably right after I was in college, so probably 94. So until he retired, so his last 20 years, he worked with one company probably. And so he just did that and took everybody to practices, and we went to church 2 or 3 times a week. And he sang in the choir, and mom was in the orchestra, and just did everything that you're supposed to do. Married to one woman, all that kind of stuff. Is just kind of old school father. And yeah, I mean, just a total blessing to get somebody like that in your life, right? To have parents that were just selfless and did everything for you and wanted nothing but the best for you. And their wants and needs were down the list, right? I mean, I know that probably happens when you have 4 kids. Your list kind of just gets thrown in the trash. Probably, you don't get a list anymore. But yeah, there's just some of that stuff is just fun. I mean, even not having that much money growing up poor, I never felt like I was poor. I mean, we give dad and mom crap about, Kit and Katie got the rich parents, we got the poor ones, but we never thought we were poor. I mean, maybe there was maybe there was a little time where we were pretty poor, and the church brought us food from the food pantry. That one was like, oh wait, this can't be good. We must be struggling. But the rest of my life, I never thought anything about it. I just thought this is what it was. And did you go on vacations? Yeah, we went on vacations all the time, right? To the Lake of the Ozarks. That was what you did. We went to Windermere. We did poor people vacations. But as a kid, you didn't know that some people were like going to Europe. I don't even know. Maybe people didn't go to Europe back then. Maybe that was too expensive. Now maybe it's just something nowadays. But one last story that I thought, again, where I thought like my dad was like a superhero was, we were down at the lake, and everybody's always learning how to ski, right? Somebody's learning how to do this. And even if you learn how to ski, you're like, okay, cool. Well, now let's learn how to ski on one, right? Now let's do it. And some of those guys were just incredible skiers, right? I mean, there were the Bob Comforts and the Steve Triplets that were trick skiing or barefoot and slalom skiing like professionals, where they're like pulling so hard on the boat that it's tugging it different ways. And none of these boats were super nice, right? So you could really pull it if you're a good skier. But one time I remember my dad popped out there on it, and instead of like coming back into the boat, because it was in the evening, he just when we came around like by the docks where everybody was kind of sitting on the grass, and it's not a beach, it was just like grass to the whatchamacallit, to the water. I remember him going around on a slalom ski, and when he came back around, so he just let go of the rope and he was just skidding right along, and I was on the grass. I wasn't in the boat or anything, so I could see it coming. I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad's in trouble, right? He's heading right for the beach. He's going to run into it and kill himself. And instead, he's coming along and he times it, right? Probably pushing down on the back to slow yourself down just enough. Then the ski kind of hits into the mud, and it pops his foot out, and he steps right up onto the grass. And I was just like, that's amazing. How can somebody do that? So you have those stories where you think your dad is like this superhero, and every once in a while you're like, oh, you get a glimpse of it. And you're like, oh yeah, he is. But my dad actually was, kind of a superhero, right? He was just as good a dad as you could ask for. So that's kind of it. I mean, for the most part, I could have said this in about 30 seconds and been like, oh, my dad? Yeah, like he's a perfect dad. So yeah, if you were going to write what a perfect dad would do, that'd be him. See ya.